Good morning and welcome to day 3 of the Hemispheric Security Conference, our 7th annual conference this year, really examining that intersection between democracy and security. We had a fantastic first 2 days, and the first day we were in person in Miami, obviously live streaming to our friends and partners across the hemisphere. And then yesterday we had a fantastic series of discussions looking at the Department of Defense's role within the Western Hemisphere, the future of the armed forces, and of course the geopolitical conflict and convergence in Venezuela. Today, we're going to keep the momentum going with 3 fantastic discussions over across this morning. Per usual, I encourage you, if you were looking for Spanish or Portuguese translations, to go to the bottom of your screen and hit the interpretation tab where you're able to move over to Spanish or Portuguese at your preference. Again, this morning, we're going to have a fantastic keynote address followed by the re-examine of the 2003 Declaration on Security in the Americas, an important piece of bi-state partnerships, multilateralism, understanding the security considerations driving the region, and whether we need to evolve that to account for the future threats facing our region. Then we're going to go into disinformation, democracy in the inter-American system, and look at the role that disinformation can play across the region. But I don't want to take up too much more of your time, so I do want to turn it over to our moderator for this next discussion. And he is someone that is very familiar to this group and someone that's actually keynoted a couple years ago in Miami, the Hemispheric Security Conference. Juan Cruz is the director of the Argentina-U.S. Strategic Forum and a non-resident senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He previously served as special assistant to the president and senior director for Western Hemisphere Affairs from 2017 to 2019. Few know more about the region and the security considerations in the region. I think he's had posts in pretty much every country. Isn't that right, Juan? Brazil, Honduras, Mexico, Panama, Peru, Venezuela, Colombia, right? You've been everywhere across the region, so I cannot think of any better person to help moderate this next discussion than Mr. Juan Cruz. Juan, I will turn it over to you.
Good morning, Randy, and thank you for that introduction, and thanks to FIU for having me. I'm tickled that I'll be able to moderate this segment. This morning, the segment of this keynote address, I have to really applaud our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Kerri Hannan, who is stepping in this morning for our original keynote speaker, who's a Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Ricardo Zúñiga, who was pulled away on family matters. And so Kerri's been dynamite. And I'll add to that she's significantly under the weather. So I take my hat off to her. I'll try to be kind and gentle, but those of you who know me know that that's probably an empty promise. Kerri Hannan is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, and she's our Deputy Secretary at Western Hemisphere, and her particular portfolio is public diplomacy, policy planning, and coordination. But she has this very enviable job of also being the primary DAS in charge of issues having to do with the People's Republic of China. And I know that that's a subject that all of us attending here the conference are super interested in. So we'll probably be looking forward to hearing from Kerri on that as well. She previously serves as the director of the Office of Press and Public Diplomacy in the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs. And also she was the deputy chief of mission and the Chargé d'Affaires at our embassy in Luxembourg. She also served as a senior advisor in the Office of Policy Planning and Resources for the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. She has previous assignments in the region, including Bolivia, Argentina, India. Importantly, she was a spokesperson in our embassy in Kabul, and she's held multiple assignments in the hardest place of all, Washington, D.C. And among those that stand out are, of course, the enviable job of serving in State Department's Operations Center. Ms. Hannan has an undergraduate degree in zoology, but she has a master's degree in Latin American studies with a concentration in tropical conservation development from the University of Florida. She speaks French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Dari. And with that brief introduction, please, let's welcome Kerri. Take over.
Hi, thank you, Juan. Good morning, and I'm really glad to be here virtually with all of you today. I'd also like to thank our host, Florida International University, and to everyone here, whether virtually or in person at FIU. This important annual gathering to reflect on the most pressing security challenges facing the Western Hemisphere comes less than 3 weeks before we kick off the U.S. hosted 9th Summit of the Americas. The summit's going to provide an important platform for the United States to carry out the administration's vision for the region. President Biden seeks to promote cooperation toward inclusive economic growth and prosperity based on our shared respect for democracy, fundamental freedoms, the dignity of labor, and free enterprise. Today's gathering and the summit comes at a time when globally democracies are facing great challenges. Nowhere have we seen this unfold more clearly than through Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, the effects of which we can see right here in our own hemisphere. Households across the region are forced to make agonizing choices as the cost of living skyrockets. We also see the enduring struggle for democracy and freedom as Ukrainians fight to save their nation, providing a clear signal that a threat to democracy anywhere poses a threat to democracies everywhere. We recognize that while democratic institutions with free and fair elections remain the norm in most countries throughout the hemisphere, in many countries, the challenges they face outpace their capacity to meet their citizens' aspirations. The hollow promises of populist and authoritarian leaders have greater appeal when democratic institutions fail to provide essential public services. We also see where pervasive corruption undermines the development of accountable democracies and inclusive economies, benefiting a corrupt and privileged few. That's why, throughout the Western Hemisphere, the administration, the State Department, and the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs are all committed to aligning our resources to help our democratic partners equitably deliver public goods, strengthen people's faith in democracy, and build safe, inclusive, prosperous, equitable, and climate resilient societies. I'd like to highlight just a few priorities in particular. First, we are committed to working through regional fora, like the Organization of American States, and alongside leaders throughout the hemisphere to defend freedom and democracy and to seek to end impunity. We strongly support the democratic aspirations of those oppressed by the authoritarian regimes in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. In Cuba, we seek to promote human rights, religious freedom, labor rights, and democracy. We encourage the development of more open telecommunications and the internet, and we support a private sector that operates free of government control. We seek to catalyze growth of Cuba's independent civil society. We impose sanctions on Cuban military and security leaders in response to the regime's violent suppression of free expression and peaceful assembly in the days and weeks following the July 11 protests last year. Last November, the Reinforcing Nicaragua's Adherence to Conditions for Electoral Reform, RENACER, Act passed with broad bipartisan support and expanded the corrupt and undemocratic actors list to include Nicaragua. On March 9th, we added the first 9 Nicaraguans to this list for their role in subverting the November 21 national elections in Nicaragua. To date, we have sanctioned 46 individuals and 9 entities in Nicaragua and imposed visa restrictions on more than 280 people for facilitating the Ortega Murillo's regime's repression. Through our political support and development assistance to the Guaido-led interim government, the Unitary Platform, and democratic organizations within and outside of Venezuela, the United States supports the protection of human rights, the promotion of civil society, the restoration of democratic institutions, and a commitment to promote transparency and regime accountability. Since 2017, the United States has provided more than $1.66 billion in humanitarian assistance to Venezuelan refugees and vulnerable migrants inside Venezuela and throughout the region. So we're bringing all our tools and resources to bear to promote a return to democracy where these authoritarian regimes persist, and we are trying to improve the day-to-day lives of all those who suffer under their repression. Second, to achieve prosperity and long-term security in the region, it is essential that all members of society can participate politically, have equal economic opportunity, and enjoy access to healthcare and education. As a whole, democratic governments in Latin America and the Caribbean have delivered some notable progress in providing prosperity, security, and stability. We've seen increasing living standards and access to education, a decrease in infant mortality and maternal mortality, and a rise in Latin America's middle class. Despite this, however, we've witnessed growing inequality alongside the economic growth, contributing to citizens' frustrations with their governments. We see great strengths in the region. The Western Hemisphere boasts a large adult population and a large young adult population and rich cultural, social, economic, and geographic diversity. But in every country of the region, historically marginalized groups, including African descendant, indigenous, LGBTQI plus persons, women and girls, and persons with disabilities face barriers and discrimination, preventing them from fully participating in political, economic, and social life. We are committed to working in partnership with civil society, the private sector, and partners inside and outside the region to promote human rights for all. We have bilateral agreements with Brazil, Colombia, and Uruguay that focus on racial and ethnic equality and social inclusion, and advanced cooperation on gender equality and women's economic and political empowerment. We can only succeed in building stronger, safer, more equitable societies through the deliberate inclusion of the most vulnerable groups. Third, as part of our mission to achieve a secure hemisphere, we are committed to addressing conditions in Northern Central America that have fueled irregular migration. The U.S. strategy for addressing the root causes of irregular migration in Central America aims to achieve a democratic, prosperous, and safe Central America, where everyone can advance economically, live, work, and learn in safety and dignity, contribute to and benefit from the democratic process, have confidence in public institutions, and enjoy opportunities to create futures for themselves and their families at home. We understand that sustainable results will take time and progress will not be linear. But by addressing labor market informality, strengthening the rule of law, and combating gang-related and sexual and gender-based violence, we can help Guatemalans, Hondurans, and Salvadorans create the futures they desire for themselves and their families in their own countries. Likewise, countering transnational criminal organizations and their activities through initiatives like the U.S.-Mexico Bicentennial Framework on Security, Public Health, and Safe Communities will lead to a safer environment for citizens of both countries. We are committed to working with governments to address structural impediments to investment and expanding access to financial capital for women, youth, and minority-owned businesses. We work with our partners to promote transparency in electoral systems through reform and enforcement of electoral campaign finance rules and open list systems to allow for direct representation. In April, we launched the United States-Honduras Strategic Dialogue, where we announced plans to continue working with Honduras to promote respect for human rights, including addressing gender-based violence. We're working with partners across the region to develop and sign a regional declaration on migration and protection at the summit in Los Angeles. This will underscore our shared responsibility to address all forms of migration as we develop a set of priorities to strengthen humane migration management, provide protection to those who need it, and reduce irregular migration throughout the hemisphere. We also see our foreign assistance and security cooperation with partner nations as critical components of our broader strategic goals of fostering a more democratic, inclusive, secure, and prosperous hemisphere. The State Department and USAID will implement $1.8 billion in fiscal year 2021 foreign assistance throughout the hemisphere. Our programs support good governance, inclusive economic development, and improved citizen security. Roughly $675 million of our fiscal year 21 assistance supports training and equipment for partner security forces, including law enforcement agencies and militaries. Crucially, promoting respect for human rights is central to our security cooperation programs. Professional security forces that respect democratic governance and human rights form critical pillars to the democratic order that we value and defend. That is why we take special care to vet every unit and person that will receive assistance, ensuring we train and cooperate with security forces that share our values. When people think of our security cooperation in the Western Hemisphere, they often think first of our rock-solid partnership with Colombia. Our partnership with Colombia remains a pillar of foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere, and the Secretary participated last October in the 10th high-level dialogue with Colombia. But just as important, if less well-known, is our security cooperation in the Caribbean. In 2010, the United States, CARICOM, and the Dominican Republic launched the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, CBSI, a partnership and U.S. foreign assistance program designed to build Caribbean capacity to reduce illicit trafficking, improve public safety, and prevent youth crime and violence. Since 2010, the United States has committed more than $830 million for CBSI. On May 25th, the United States will participate in the 10th high-level Caribbean-U.S. Security Cooperation Dialogue to review our shared progress under CBSI. There we'll also address 4 top priority security challenges raised by our Caribbean partners: firearms trafficking, illicit maritime trafficking, cybercrime, and trafficking in persons. As you all know, illicit trafficking in the Caribbean contributes to violence and gang-related crime in the region. For instance, Jamaica ranks 10th globally and first in the Western Hemisphere for homicides. Jamaican youth are often the main victims and perpetrators. Building on past successes with community-based policing, USAID helps strengthen the relationship between citizens, especially young people, and law enforcement in targeted communities. USAID also supports youth development programs that address prevention, intervention, and rehabilitation. In closing, the Western Hemisphere stands at a crossroads. Democracies face great challenges. Social exclusion and inequality create instability across the region and pose a risk we must help our partners address. Democratic institutions have not always delivered the public goods their citizens demand: good governance, rule of law, citizen security, economic opportunity, healthcare, education. We don't have all the answers. We face plenty of challenges right here at home, so we approach this work with a spirit of humility and partnership. But we do have some lessons learned and resources to share. So we're focused on doing what we can, where we can, to help democracies deliver for their people, and that means all of their people. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions, Juan.
Thank you very much, Kerri. Thanks for that detailed, thoughtful, and comprehensive outlook. Word for our participants. What we'll do is I have some areas of conversation with Kerri, but I'd welcome any question and answers that we'll try to address at the end of the conversation. Please take advantage of the chat function. For that, I'll be monitoring the chat as well. Kerri, you've given us a lot to think about, covered a lot of terrain and territory. And what I'd like to do is, one of the subjects that has been reoccurring, lots of interest throughout the conference to date has been the issue of the Summit of the Americas, who's going, who's not going, what we're going to cover. And I thought with such a keen interest and that we'd set some foundational questions. So my first one, bear with me, it's a little long, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to sort of set the stage where we are. So, the Summit of the Americas and most summits usually are cloaked in some sort of controversy. And that's certainly been the case with this 9th summit, where we've seen a lot said, and we can get into that later, but that's not really what I want to cover. What I want to get into is I'd like for you to lay out for us the actual vision for the summit. What does it look like? Who's going to be present? What themes are we going to cover? And more importantly, what the outcomes look like if, State today would be able to script the whole thing and say, this is what a really strong summit would look like, and this is what we would cover.
Boy, if I could script the summit, we'd go back in time a year and lay it out. I think this summit, I don't want to get the 5. There are 5 themes that we're focused on for the summit, which I'm sure DMP, as we like to call her, raised yesterday. But our goal is to come up with a solid list of deliverables, to use government speak, that align with the needs that our partners and the attendees at the summit come up with. So we're dealing with clean energy, we're dealing with green future, we're dealing with responding to the pandemic and economic recovery, creating opportunities for all populations in the region, equitable access to economic, social, and political opportunities. I think what's also interesting about this summit are the 3 forums that happen that I don't think people realize all the time. Everybody's focused on the leaders and those meetings that we have during the 2 days, but on the margins of the summit, you're going to see 3 forums, the CEO forum, which brings together not just CEOs, but medium and small enterprise businesses interested in the hemisphere and the economics in the hemisphere, but also the youth forum and the civil society forum. This is a little bit niche, but I'm excited because the youth forum, we're bringing up 5 of our Young Leaders of the Americas Initiative fellows to participate. That's a large network of Latin American and Caribbean entrepreneurs who come together every year to learn how to be stronger entrepreneurs and build a network. And so the summit is just one vehicle for them to come together and create opportunities in their own communities. The civil society and the Civil Society Forum is another opportunity to discuss key issues that our partners face from civil society. All countries are invited to attend there. And of course, the CEO Forum is always an interesting place for conversations to happen. If what I would like to see is robust conversation. I would like to see leaders discussing the hard problems that we all face in the region. I think some cross-cutting issues are going to be disinformation, which I know you're having a session on later. I think that's a really critical issue that we've seen amplified, especially with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think also irregular migration is an issue that the entire hemisphere is dealing with, and we're aggressively working together to try and find solutions to improve the safety for the migrants and find economic opportunities to reduce it.
Thank you, Kerri. I'm going to continue with this this thread on the summit. And as you know, the summit has received some bad press, both domestically and internationally. In the region, they haven't been particularly kind. But this week, there was one article in a major international outlet that referred to, quote, the waning U.S. influence, end quote, sort of vis-a-vis China, and particularly if we don't pull off something worthwhile at the summit. What's your reaction to that statement? Yeah, you probably didn't get a chance to read the article, but it's one that basically says the U.S. either pulls off a good summit, or this is exactly an indication of sort of a great power losing its influence in an area that it's dominated for decades.
No, I appreciate the question. You know, it sounds a lot like talking points I'm hearing coming out of some of our competitors as we lay them out about how our influence is waning in the region. I bet if we went back press to prior summits or any major meeting that we've hosted, you've probably seen that criticism too. And yet we are still the preferred partner in the region. We are still here. We are still contributing to economic prosperity. We are still partnering with democracies that want to partner. I think the summit is, the criticism is always going to be there. It is a meeting. It is an important meeting. It is a rare opportunity to bring all of the leaders together to partner with what I certainly believe is the most important partner in the region overall. We've been there with Latin America and the Caribbean for years. I mean, I'm not going to put a number on it. I mean, we're celebrating 200 years of relations with Colombia this year, with Mexico this year. I mean, we are the premier partner. And that criticism is going to be there. But I think where the rubber meets the road is when we have those meetings, when we look for those deliverables, when we figure out ways to use the assistance to help address some of these really important scenarios that we've laid out. You know, we're going to develop a resilient, a sustainable, a green future, but we need to be in it together.
Kerri, I've been advised by the Zoom gods that I committed a faux pas that I might be monitoring the chat function, but there's actually a question and answer tab that people can use. So I'll be monitoring why I'm not going to get a paycheck for this time. So I'll be monitoring both of those. Kerri, you mentioned something about, both in your comments and just now in your response about Russia and the Ukraine and impact. And I was wondering, because it's not a theme that I think is necessarily directly addressed, but you think you'll have a chance to discuss sort of the impact of the crisis on the region, or it's been noticed that a few of the major countries haven't been very vociferous in criticizing Russia, and they've been very careful. Is there any room for us to exercise any sort of diplomacy in the summit regarding the crisis in the Ukraine?
I don't know what specifically related to Russia and the Ukraine will happen at the summit. I won't be party to conversations that happen on the margins or behind closed doors. But I can say that, we have been aggressively messaging within the region using our social media properties, meaning U.S. Embassy, U.S. government, to make sure and letting our partners understand the influence of disinformation coming out of RT and Sputnik, sharing the impact of what's happening in Ukraine. We did this incredible program in Central America where we were able to bring Ukrainian journalists in Ukraine to talk to Latin American journalists in Central America so that they could get ground truth reality about what's happening from the source. So if you don't want to hear it from us, let's talk to some Ukrainians to understand what's really happening. And that information, I think people understand. I think for the vast majority, if you look at the way that our nations in the Caribbean and South America have voted in multilateral institutions, they also condemn Russia's actions in Ukraine. For those countries that have not perhaps aligned themselves with democracy, and there is a a risk. And if you want to align yourself with a nation that treats its people that way or doesn't respect sovereignty, you're setting a precedent. I also think that when we talk about the conversations we're having about whether or not, we have been pretty clear about what will be the implications of supporting Russia and their actions in Ukraine with some other countries. But we continue to talk to our partners in the region to make them understand what's happening and who the real bad guy is.
Thank you, Kerri. Kerri, you also mentioned the issue of security in your comments, and security per se as a specific theme is not covered in the 9th summit, but that's not fair to say, right? Because security is covered in the agenda in a lot of the themes that you laid out. Could you parcel that out for us? Could you sort of underscore these are security themes, or where there's a room for security discussions to take place around some of the major themes of the summit?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I don't think we don't have a security as a top line, but security, citizen security, rule of law, judicial reform is all inherently built into the structure of any conversation we have with leadership or civil society in the region. Anything that we're doing that addresses economic opportunity is also providing, gangs thrive where there's corruption. People lean into, don't expect their governments to deliver, and therefore they rely on broken systems or gangs to provide security. But if you have strong rule of law, if you have strong judicial systems, if you have prosecutorial reform, then people trust institutions, governments can deliver, security is improved. So anything that we do in all of these areas, I mean, climate change has an impact on security. I mean, there is not a topic that we have laid out as a potential for discussion or conversation at the summit that, if improved, doesn't improve citizen security, reduce transnational crime, improve the capacity of a government to deliver for its people. So it is woven throughout.
And I would even include disinformation in that, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, disinformation. Yeah, I could talk all day about disinformation and I think that the threats to free media, threats to journalists in general, both their safety, but also their ability to report, Nicaraguan journalists are in exile, have had to leave Nicaragua, are bravely telling the stories that are happening there. I mean, it is critical, absolutely critical, that citizens have access to accurate information, and the ability to manipulate information, to influence elections, to influence public opinion. It is scary. It scares me because I think it's the next battlefront, I think. Personally.
I mean, there's tremendous interest in a lot of mystery surrounding it, right? And a lot of false narrative, people not understanding exactly what it is and how it can impact on them. So I think, if we do it right at the summit, there's a lot of opportunity for sharing knowledge and being able to prepare people for the impact of this.
Absolutely.
I have a hard question here for you, I think. This week, there's a U.S. team in Mexico meeting with counterparts precisely on the issue of the summit and summit matters. What can you share about how it's going, objectives? Do you have any scoops for us?
I have no scoops. I'm aware of that trip, and I know that it's important that we want to see all leaders and all democratic nations present at the summit. And so hopefully any conversations that are happening in Mexico will help pave the way for that. But I have no scoops, unfortunately.
Well, okay, but that's interesting, because as we know, there are a handful of countries that have threatened with not going, or at least expressed a concern that if others aren't invited, namely Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, then how can they attend? But let's be honest, if we have something like migration on the agenda, and we don't have at the table, and I know you've distinguished this, but if we don't have at the table Mexico, Guatemala, or Honduras, or Salvador, what could that look like at the summit? Addressing the issue of migration without Mexico, or with a delegation that's not at the presidential level? Or, what does it look like if if one or more of the Central American countries don't attend, and yet we have this theme? How do we handle that?
Well, I don't want to be a pessimist, so I'm going to make the assumption that everybody's coming. How do we handle it? I don't want to be speculative, but we've been having dialogues ongoing about these important issues with all of our partners for ages. So, the summit is an incredibly important and public opportunity to raise these issues at the top level with senior leadership. And when I say senior, I mean POTUS, the presidents. It's an opportunity to draw attention to what I think gets lost in all of the media that is focusing on who's going to attend and who's not, and trying to take political stands. The Cubans are loving this. Getting the attention that they get for not attending and continuing to bang that drum. But in reality, it's the stuff that I mentioned before on the edges of the summit. It's the conversations that are going to be happening. It's the ability to understand each other. It's the civil society forum, the youth forum, where we're really going to have conversations that will, in the long term, address the underpinning root causes of migration, because we're signing migration arrangements. We're working with governments to try and address the threats, the border security. All of that is happening. But this is such a complex picture, and the summit is a focal point to talk about those complex issues that we face and try and find solutions.
You mentioned the Cuba piece, and I can't help but think that the Cuban government gets a kick out of all this noise that they've made about the attendance, and then of course the accompanying noise they make and holding up articles or sentiments that play to their narrative on the summit. And I can't help but think that they enjoy that a lot more than they would if they sat at the actual summit. And who knows if we'd invite them, if they would even go. I have my doubts. But anyway, they thrive in this atmosphere of chaos and be able to manipulate the information. And
yeah, I agree. The more that they can shine the light on us and call us the bad guy, they're avoiding the fact that the repression that they've been actively perpetrating against their people since July 11th. I mean, the amount of repression and suffering that the Cuban people have, the human rights violations, that's a lot less. They don't want the press on that. They want the press on us not inviting them to the summit or not. Well, you know what? Stop repressing your people.
The hypocrisy of it.
Yeah,
of
the hypocrisy plays well in the media, as we probably all know.
You spoke about having a positive outlook and having a summit where everyone shows up. And so we've spoken about a handful of countries that perhaps, it has to do with the attendance or non-attendance of these three countries we've already mentioned, but it's more difficult to discern why a handful of other countries have expressed doubt about attending. And what could we do to encourage them to turn the page and show up? And to name names, I'm thinking Brazil, Guatemala, maybe Salvador, where there's a reluctance, where there's a perceived reluctance that maybe they're not wanted or they wouldn't enjoy themselves, or that. How do we address that and get them to overlook that, or find that the summit provides a great place to have those hard discussions? Why don't you come and we'll talk about it in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I think you answered the question. Any country that doesn't want to come is losing the opportunity to talk to us. And, you can be, it's weird to speak of a country as a person, but a country can be mad at another country or feel like, we're not giving you the full hand. How do I say that? It's weird to talk about countries and sort of people. So I'll speak about people. You can be mad at a person and not think that they're giving you a fair shake. But the reality is we've been in this region for so long, partnering, trying to help these countries deal with some of the challenges that they face. We deal with any government democratically elected. We want to see success. We share partnership. We care about what happens in the region. This is our region. So how do we get them to come to the summit? The summit matters. We continue to message them that the summit matters. We have 2 special advisors out and about. Special advisor Dodd is down there, is traveling right now, making sure that any leader that has any kind of skepticism or point to be made gets a chance to say what they feel. It's better to be in the room complaining about how you're treated than to sit outside and throw stones. So if we can share, look, we're willing to listen. We want you at the table. again, I'm sort of speaking in generalities about nations that have incredibly complex histories and problems and issues to distress, and they can't be broken down into one conversation. But none of those conversations happen if you're not at the table. Will we solve all of them? Will we address them? Will you get the result you want? No, but at least we're in the room having the conversation, and that relationship continues. To think that you could ever not want to partner with the United States, to me, again, as the eternal optimist, is crazy. I mean, we are here. We are your partner of choice. Don't take a stand and end up harming yourself.
Well, let's continue on that, because you've used, you want to be optimistic, and so let's give this. What message is there for China, deliberate or otherwise, in pulling off a successful summit?
For China?
So we get what you just said. A summit like the region deserves, a good summit, everything. What's China's takeaway on that?
Well, China wants us to declare some kind of I think that I'm trying to say this in a way so I say this correctly, but China wants to say this is our part of the world, that's your part of the world. And that's not what we're saying. We're talking about partnership, right? We are partners with the country in this region. We share issues with the countries in the hemisphere because we're in the same hemisphere. We're dealing with similar issues: climate change, irregular migration. And so what that sends to the message that it sends to China is that the United States is still a valid and valued partner to the nations. We don't want China not to partner in the region. What we have always asked for is transparency, to follow social and labor laws when you do offer infrastructure projects, that that countries here have their eyes open in the hemisphere if they partner with China or other vendors. We're not saying we're your only partner of choice. It's a globe, but we are saying we are, look who's been there for you all along. Look who helped build your health system. When you look at who was there, who was there when the hurricanes happened, who does disaster relief, who's done military training, who's brought the Mercy ship. We are a long-term partner to the region. And what we're showing China is basically the same story. The summit is not a change. It's not a change of course. It's the next summit that's been going on since '94. It's us talking to our partners in the region about the issues that we confront and looking for solutions.
Perfect. Now, I've been monitoring the correct tabs, and I've tried to incorporate some of the general themes in the discussion we've had to date. But I'm going to read one or two of the questions that either have the most themes of all the questions asked, or that are entirely new, right? So let me read this one to you. It has been announced that a hemispheric declaration of migration will be signed on the margins of the summit. Do you know when this would take place and what countries would sign on to this? What are the expectations for such a declaration? Is that too far in the weeds for you, or?
No, I'm aware of the signing. I'm aware that that is an aim of the summit, to sign the Los Angeles. I'm not going to get the title exactly right.
Sure.
But yeah, I have to acknowledge that I couldn't tell you. I can opine that the goal is to find solutions to address. I would focus on the things that the White House and this administration have focused on, the root causes of irregular migration. But there's probably, because it's not just, remember, I sit in the State Department seat, but there's a much broader conversation happening across the U.S. government related to border enforcement and protections, and what happens when Title 42, if it stops being enforced. There's a whole suite of issues that need to be addressed that are going to have long-term impacts. And so I'm going to opine that this is going to start laying out next steps for how we deal with migration in the coming years, to include addressing root causes, which is really where the State Department and USAID and many other agencies spend their time trying to help nations, create resiliency and encourage people not to leave their home countries, to deal with violence, to deal with providing opportunity for youth, all of those things.
Well, speaking of which, one of these questions is, it is very positive that there are forums that accompany the summit for young people, civil society, CEOs. What instruments are there to move any of those agreements into practice?
Agreements that come out of the forums? I don't know. I think that what I can say, so I've been sitting on the margins of the summit organization team, right? Our national coordinator sits in my office, and then my team, which is public diplomacy, and has a large team that's put together a media event on June 7th that's going to talk about disinformation, but also journalist integrity. We've worked with OAS. We're doing a lot in that space. We also are working. I have seen so many interested partners that want to support the summit that are already working in the region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, are already invested in the people, in the economies, in addressing some of the issues that the nations face and that the citizenry faces. And they are committed to coming to the summit to both showcase products, opportunities, investments, to contribute to some of the problems we're facing. And it is amazing. Organizations, non-government, civil society, private sector want to contribute to the summit. So in terms of what we're going to see, I think it's going to be massive. The kinds of, when I say deliverables, there's government deliverables, like here's, foreign assistance to address this issue, but there's also, hey, Amazon's going to do this, or company you've never heard of is actually investing millions and millions of dollars. I don't want to just use Amazon. I mean, I don't mean to shout out for Amazon, but they are sort of prevalent. But there are so many companies, investment companies and media companies just committed to the region, committed to the people. And I also want to highlight, since we announced it was going to be in LA, our the State Department and other agencies in the government have gone out to LA and had these unbelievably interesting conversations, really in-depth conversations with the diaspora out there. I mean, the diaspora in LA, we live in the Beltway. I'm sitting in DC, I'm talking to my tiny little square of people. You go out to LA and there's a whole world of El Salvadorans and Guatemalans and Central Americans from elsewhere, and South Americans, and they have perspective, and they have ideas, and they have concerns, and they have so much information. And the city of Los Angeles has been an incredible partner. They have incredible contacts. We're partnering with universities out there. There's just so much energy around the summit that we're tapping into being in LA. And there's events that are going to happen in Miami too that are supporting the summit. I mean, the entire country has elements led by diaspora organizations that are supporting the summit. So I wouldn't just, I couldn't give you a list because it'd be 10 pages long.
Okay, I'm gonna read 3 questions for you, and so that the idea is so that you can take a common theme and respond to them. You don't have, because we can't get to all of these. But so the first one is, what is the U.S. doing to link security priorities to economic priorities in the region? Second question, looking at the Caribbean in specific, what conversations have you had with the Caribbean nations regarding specific security threats facing them? And then I think I'll read this one as the third one, is how constructive has the USA been in working with regional organizations as opposed to taking unilateral decisions to tackle security challenges?
Did you say USAID?
USA, the US.
Oh, sorry. US, the USA.
Yeah.
The last question was, how have they done working with regional versus
doing it on their own?
Doing
the US doing it unilaterally.
Oh, I mean, okay. So the third question, we're always going to do better to partner. Either it's, and Haiti's a perfect example of strength. We can't instill order in Haiti. That's up to the Haitian National Police, and we have given them funding and training and observers to the UN mission. I think it's the UN mission, to help them develop the capacity to address the security situation and gang violence in Haiti, as an example. The Caribbean faces a lot of security issues, if I understand the question. I think one interesting area we're working on, we work a lot with them on energy security, which you might think, how is that related to depending on how you interpret security, but energy and resilience to climate change is an incredibly important issue that the White House is heavily focused on. They've signed a new agreement or revitalized an agreement that was already existing to talk about climate security. We've got development money going there. We want the Caribbean to be able to provide for their own energy, to be resilient, to not be dependent on other nations, and to have clear and transparent and fair bidding practices when they build out this infrastructure, all of which contributes to the third question, which is, What kinds of issues do we address broadly that touch security I think anti-corruption is probably one of the most important areas that we work in. You say, well, because I use this, I talked to Congress a couple of weeks ago, and they were like, what does corruption have to do with China? But corruption has to do with everything. If you don't address the threat, if people don't trust systems because the corruption is there at all levels, I'm talking about bribing the police officer to corporations having to pay governments in order to get fair bidding, to get to be able to even bid on a contract, the whole system collapses. There's no security there. So that in turn will lead to gangs being able to capitalize on broken systems. Therefore, there's gang violence, there's impunity. I mean, the entire I know there are academics on this call who have probably mapped out incredibly complex systems that explain where it comes from. But the point is, there are so many issues that we work on that, if we could just turn a lever. I mean, I think I was talking to Juan yesterday briefly, and I said, we could have an entire conversation about maternal health or childhood education. We could probably address security in the hemisphere if we put money into maternal health. And there is an absolute arrow between those two topics. There's an absolute arrow between childhood education and prison reform and judicial reform and training police. I mean, every issue is about empowering a citizenry to demand from their democracies what they need in order, and governments can provide security if, it's a dance, it's a dialogue. It's a very complicated one, but.
Well, I heard in one of your comments above is efforts to have outreach with educational institutions, universities out in California. And I've always found that some of the greatest interest in these summits are by players outside of government. And I think we've talked a little bit about that, but it goes to this question: what role can universities, think tanks, and other groups play in supporting U.S. objectives in the region?
Well, you can host conferences that bring experts together so we can actually share information. I think that the research that you do, I'm party to, I don't know how many people on this call are aware of 100,000 Strong, but that's a flagship program that the Western Hemisphere Bureau has had since 2012, if I'm not mistaken, where we do university partnerships between U.S. universities and universities in the region. It's funded private sector. I've also done it in South and Central Asia. We did university partnerships. Actually, I hosted an FIU visit in Argentina when I was there, bringing universities down to visit institutions, sharing academic knowledge, targeting some of that academic exchange onto issues that matter, like STEM, critical minerals, research into climate change, developing new technologies. I mean, the brain power. I know that the question may have been aimed more at like the political challenges that we face, but there's also incredible scientific challenges, and some would argue, I'm in that camp, that climate change is the greatest problem facing the world, full stop. And so when we're able to utilize university expertise, indigenous skill sets, I mean, there's so much knowledge out there that I, sitting in a government office, can't access. The people who are probably closest to it are academics. And those academics, if I can find a way to link academics with academics in the US and share that knowledge and develop, hybrid technologies and share information, there's an incredible opportunity there. And so some of the stuff that doesn't get the attention in the media are things like Fulbright programs and university partnerships and student exchange. These are the places where real change happens. It's not fast, it's not bilateral, it's not coming out of a summit, but the impact that I have seen of some of our university partnerships, the impact that some of our exchange participants have made because they came to the US, they went to a US university, they were exposed to an idea that they would not have been exposed to if they had not come to the US, and the reverse. American students going to Latin America and being exposed to new technologies and new ideas and new problem sets and working with people there greatly enriched the intellectual capacity of our world. And so that's a little high-minded. I acknowledge that. I also think research and conversations that academics have challenging the status quo, forcing us Washington bureaucrats to talk outside of our circles, all of that is critical. That's why the summit's so important. And I'm so thrilled it's in LA. We're just going to get different voices than we normally get.
Great, Kerri. And I think we're going to start wrapping it up soon, but I want to, something that you said is absolutely, I think, is consistent with follow-up after the summit. Summit will open doors, and universities, think tanks, and others can take advantage of that opening to expand it. To your point, a few weeks ago, I was in Argentina, just happened to be in one of the universities that focuses on international relations, and there was an U.S. embassy sponsored course where the professor had been brought by the USG from the U.S. and was giving a course on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East to a consortium of Argentine students, which I think goes to your point. But I'm going to push back on something only that I believe in what you said. I just don't think that we're doing as much as we could be doing, especially when compared to China. So I grew up in the Cold War. I grew up when, part of our soft power was precisely what you've talked about, these scholarships and opening doors and introducing our culture and winning people over. And I get a sense instinctively that we do a lot less of that these days, but we certainly do a lot less than that when compared to the Chinese and the Chinese in the region. And I can't tell you how often I talk to counterparts in the region. They talk about the dozens or maybe hundreds of scholarships that the Chinese are offering for their people to go to China and study for free, that pales that makes the U.S. offer pale in comparison, right? So we've got the right idea, but I don't think we had the scalability, and certainly not the scalability that we had earlier. Certainly in the Cold War. Sort of a commentary on my part. I'll let you talk about that, but let me throw one more issue, and maybe we can incorporate that in some closing remarks that you can give. I'll give you sort of the last word to address that. And I think it's because it's important. We haven't addressed this, and the question is, what discussions regarding increasing the role of women in peace and security and the protection of women across the region? Broad question, but you can get at it from whatever direction you like and incorporate it into some sort of last comments.
It's a grand theme. So yes, absolutely. Women should be at the table. They're not at the table enough. Most of the security threats that face citizenry are a burden that women bear more than men, not just in wartime, but gang violence, trafficking in persons. I think the more we involve women at the table, I think the efforts by the Women in Peace and Security, the efforts to include women and children in the peace accords in Colombia, I think the efforts in between the NALS, the North American Leaders Summit that happened between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. that focuses on women and indigenous rights. I think all of this focus on underserved, underrepresented, under-resourced groups is incredibly important, because not only do they bring knowledge, they bring experience, they suffer more for some of the security violations and lack of citizen security. So how do we do it? I mean, we're doing it. We need to continue to do it. We're having to undo a lot of societal norms. We're having to go all the way back to, maternal health. We're having to go all the way back to childhood education to get girls into school, into STEM programs, into college, not married, access to healthcare. All of that needs to happen in order for women to continue to be available to be at the table. So again, if you take any problem that I've addressed, it's a macro system. I cannot address migration by doing one thing. I have to address the entire suite of problems, which would have been a better place to end. But I do want to address China takes people to the U.S. to China to go to Chinese universities, but if you look at the open doors number, Latin America sends their kids to the U.S. because we have strong universities and we have wildly engaged and intelligent diaspora communities that encourage them to come there. They have family, they have opportunity. I think that a free trip to China sounds fun, but at the end of the day, when you get to China and you see some of the ways the Chinese government treats their people, some of the repression, the way that education is taught, people see through it. They know what what a fun trip is versus what a partnership is. One of the things you didn't mention in my bio, because my bio is too long, is that I was the director of English language programs for the Department of State. And English language is a massive, massive value add that study in the United States has. It's as much as Americans are learning Spanish, Latin America and the Caribbean, well, not the Caribbean, but are learning English. It's creating more and more bridges between us. I think that the U.S. continues to work heavily to get U.S. students to come to Latin America, so that there's a lot more shared community between both the U.S. It's not just students coming to the U.S. U.S. students need to continue to study abroad. I think the linkages that we build will continue to build on the natural affinity and partnership that already exists in our region. China can continue to offer trips for military or for students or for government leaders, and that's great. But at the end of the day, who's your partner, who's your ally, who's there, who's been there, who's going to remain there. And I think the summit's going to be a really important opportunity to showcase those partnerships and how much we're committed to the region and how much we share and how much we can do together. So I'm really looking forward to what comes out of the summit. Good and bad. I mean, I think the last point I'll make is that it's a little simplistic, but we are a bit like a family. I'm not expecting everyone to come and get along. It's a Thanksgiving dinner. There's going to be some spats and disagreements, but at the end of the day, we're all going to eat turkey or samosas, or no, that's India. Sorry, that's I just
empanadas.
Salteñas,
vegan empanadas.
Empanadas, salteñas, some alfajores.
Thank you so much, Kerri. You're a good sport. I know that you had to jump in at the last moment, that you're feeling, under the weather, but I think you did more than enough justice to this. I think you brought it all in. You didn't run away from anything, and we covered a lot of ground. So I want to thank you for peeling yourself away from the over-the-counter meds. And
if I could show you the level of drugs that I have right next to me.
So I'm probably committing some sort of faux pas, but I'm going to say it. Kerri's literally in the midst of fighting COVID. So and she didn't sound that hot when I talked to her yesterday. I could do this. Exactly. So anyway,
we're good.
Anyway, I applaud you running in and taking over and wrestling with this issue. You did a great job. Thanks, Kerri.
Thanks, Juan. I appreciate it.
Over to you, Randy.
Thanks, Juan. And I want to echo what Juan mentioned, Deputy Assistant Secretary Hannan. But thank you so much for joining us today and providing us some of your experience and expertise. And Juan, absolutely masterful job of moderating. I'm going to try to emulate what you've done today in future sessions.